We're starting to see a few more attendees coming in now, so welcome, Alex, Chester, Caitlin, Louise. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes here. Welcome, Caitlin, in order to let a few more of our attendees join. Welcome, Rob. Welcome, Christy. And welcome, Eric. Just another couple of minutes here. Let us get a few more of our participants coming in. Welcome, Jill. Okay, we're going to begin. We're going to continue to have some of our participants coming in gradually here. Welcome, everyone. This is our, if I can count, our 5th Alberta Spinal Cord Injury Learning Seminar. This is Active Living Nutrition webinar, and we've got 4 wonderful presenters today. My name is Ule, and I'm going to be your moderator. I also have a couple of my teammates that are here from SCI Alberta that will help moderate and answer questions. I've got Alicia and Steve. And I'm going to just share my screen here in order to introduce the rest of the panelists. So today we have 4 panelists, and I'd like to introduce Christy Johnson, Kelsey Ruby, Brittany Nunzig, and Casey Aiello. Christy Johnson is our first presenter. She's a registered dietitian. She works on both the acute and the chronic units of neurology, neurosurgery, and spinal cord injury at the Foothills Medical Center. She's been in this position for the past 6 years. Christy originally grew up in New Brunswick, and she did her schooling for nutrition at the St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia. Welcome, Christy. Kelsey Ruby completed her nutrition degree at the University of Alberta. She's had an interest in nutrition and healthy living and loves providing guidance to patients to improve their diets. She's been a dietitian for 8 years now. She's been working in many different areas, including pediatrics, geriatrics, home care, supportive living, and most recently, she's working in stroke and spinal cord injury rehabilitation at the Glen Rose Hospital. Since starting on this spinal cord injury unit, Kelsey has been learning about a lot of specific nutritional needs and concerns for people living with spinal cord injuries, and she's very much looking forward to sharing those today. Brittany Nunzig is a wife, mom, a teacher, and she's been in a wheelchair for almost 21 years. 10 years ago, she turned to natural medicine and nutrition to help her deal with chronic urinary tract infections, improve bowel function, and reduce other spinal cord injury-related health issues. She's developed a passion for nutrition, and she has become a health and wellness advocate for the disability community. Welcome, Brittany. And our 4th presenter, Casey Aiello, was injured when she was 20 years old while snowboarding, and she broke her neck at the C6, C7 level. In addition, for the last several years of trying a ton of different adaptive sports, she also loves to play wheelchair rugby. She enjoys mountain biking on her adaptive bike in Fernie, BC. Casey has a passion for food, and that's led her to complete a Nutrition for Healthy Lifestyle certificate program at SAIT. And she was previously employed by SCI Alberta a few years ago as a client service coordinator. So Casey knows us quite well at SCI Alberta. And she facilitated in-house nutrition cooking classes for clients, as she describes, back in the day. I don't think it was that long ago, Casey, but it was before my time for sure. Casey is now currently employed by Alberta Health Services as the patient liaison for neurosciences at the Foothills Medical Center in Calgary, Alberta. Welcome to all of our presenters. I'm looking forward to this. I hope everyone is as well. A couple of kind of housekeeping items. When you have questions during our panelist presentations, please feel free to go for the question and answer component section that's in the bottom of your screen. I'll be looking for that, so will Alicia, so will Steve. So don't be shy. Feel free to either answer or put questions in there or put them directly in the chat box. We're going to be monitoring this as we go and directing traffic, so to speak, to see who can best answer your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this screen over to Christy, and I will get stop sharing here and let her take the mic.
Thank you, Ole. We'll just get the slides up here in a second. Perfect. All right, so next slide, please. So again, my name is Christy. I'm a registered dietitian. Next slide, please. The topic we'll discuss first today is weight management and spinal cord injury. So in general, a person's daily energy requirements are affected by their age, gender, degree of muscle mass, level of physical activity, as well as stress on their body. After spinal cord injury, you begin to lose muscle mass below the site of your injury. This is caused by both denervation and deuse of the muscles. This muscle atrophy leads to changes in your body composition. Having less muscle mass causes your daily energy requirements to be reduced. It is important to be aware of this change in your body so you can adjust your diet and eating habits accordingly. If you don't adjust your diet, you could begin to lose or to gain weight over time, which can lead to increased risk of disease processes such as diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. Next slide, please. So in order to prevent unwanted weight gain, you may need to make a few adjustments to your diet, and you might not be able to eat exactly like you did pre-injury. So what does this mean in terms of meal planning? So a few things to consider are watching your portion sizes. So it's pretty easy to over consume, especially in today's society, and especially with the portion sizes that exist, for example, in restaurants. So one thing I like to tell people, especially for eating at home, is to maybe try getting a smaller plate or a smaller bowl, still being able to fill that up. It can make you feel like you're still eating the same amount, but actually you're having slightly smaller portion sizes. Another thing to consider is excessive snacking. So a lot of people do tend to snack for reasons other than hunger. And so a lot of the time people end up snacking out of boredom, out of stress. So one thing I like to tell people is to potentially consider taking up a hobby or maybe even joining a support group. For example, the spinal cord injury group. And this can help with reduced stress and reduced snacking. But of course, if you are hungry, absolutely have a snack. Just try to make it a healthier choice. In addition to that, alcohol consumption may be something that you'd like to revise. So alcohol can lead to empty calories and unfortunately some unwanted weight gain if over consuming is occurring. So of course you can enjoy a beverage once in a while, but remember to limit the amount. So being mindful of eating out. If this was something that you did quite a bit pre-injury, this may be something that you'd consider revising. Certainly by making more meals at home, it allows you to have greater control of what you're consuming and of course, being able to control your portion sizes as well. Next slide, please. So some other practical tips for eating healthy post-injury would be to have lots of fruits and vegetables available as a snack option. So I like to tell people to, once they're done getting their groceries and they have their fruits and vegetables at home, try to wash them, cut them up, portion them, either put them in the fridge or the freezer, and that way they're readily available when you're feeling hungry and they're an easy thing to reach for as a snacking option. You can also consider doing some batch cooking. So if you're feeling particularly motivated and energized one day, maybe you have some friends over, try to make maybe 3 or 4 times the amount of food that you would normally have at one meal. portion it out into a meal size portion, and then you can store it either in the fridge or again in the freezer. And that way, for days that you're feeling a little bit less motivated, all you have to do is reach into the freezer, grab that meal, and heat it up for the day. Also, consider some of the amazing meal delivery services that are out there. Right now, there's so many amazing meal choices. For example, HelloFresh, Chef's Plate, even Meals on Wheels are great options to have, again, for those days that you're just not really feeling like cooking. Next slide, please. So I wanted to include this slide because I definitely do get this question a fair amount. Is there a special diet that I have to follow? And the quick answer is no. No special diet is needed. Really, sustainability and having a healthy lifestyle, something that you can do day in, day out, is the key. And so you really want to eat for health and wellness, and that includes mental health and wellness as well. So I like to tell people to try to consume a healthy, clean diet 80% of the time, and then allow yourself a treat 20% of the time. So the 80-20 rule. Next slide, please. So switching gears a little bit now, I'd like to talk about nutrition and skin health. So in particular, wound management. So after spinal cord injury, you are at increased risk of developing a pressure sore or a pressure ulcer. Nutrition plays an extremely important role in terms of both preventing a wound and for wound healing. So the key ingredient or the key nutrients involved in wound healing are extra calories and protein, extra fluids, and the micronutrients iron, zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin A. Next slide, please. So protein is extremely important in helping facilitate new skin growth, new skin regeneration, and as well with your immune function. So most people are aware of a lot of the high protein foods. So you want to, if you do have the presence of an ulcer, you want to try to increase your protein by 1.5 times what you would normally consume. So this could mean having a bit larger of a protein portion at each meal or adding a few extra high protein snacks throughout the day. So here listed are some of the examples: cheese, fish, meat, poultry, in addition to dairy products, nuts and seeds, and nut butters as well. Next slide, please. The other micronutrients involved, or some micronutrients involved in wound healing, are iron and zinc. So the nice thing is, if you're eating a high protein diet, you're likely getting adequate amounts of iron and zinc because these micronutrients are in your high protein foods. So your nuts, seeds, seafood, chicken, beef. Iron is also in some non-animal based foods as well. So for example, blackstrap molasses, dried fruits like raisins, iron fortified cereals, and leafy greens like spinach. Iron is actually, and especially those types of iron, are best absorbed if they're paired with a food that's high in vitamin C. So for example, if you're having an omelet for breakfast, try to pair it with a glass of orange juice for best optimal absorption. Next slide, please. Other micronutrients involved in wound healing are vitamin A and vitamin C. So for vitamin A, think about orange fruits and vegetables, colorful fruits and vegetables, but in particular orange. So think carrots, papaya, pumpkin, squash, mango. These foods are going to be your high vitamin A containing foods. And then vitamin C, of course, most people think of your oranges and citrus foods, which absolutely, those are high vitamin C foods. Just a fun fact, the red bell peppers are actually one of the highest source of vitamin C, and actually have 3 times more vitamin C than an orange. So basically, your goal is to have a really well-balanced diet. And if you're eating a variety of foods, including these that I've just listed, then it's not likely that you're going to require any kind of supplementation. Next slide, please. I've included here a high protein smoothie recipe idea. This can obviously be consumed anytime, but if you do have a pressure ulcer, this might be a nice smoothie that you add into your day. Next slide, please. I just wanted to end with talking a little bit about nutrition in the community. So if you have lots of nutrition questions and you'd like to see a dietitian, there's lots of options out in the community. So I've listed here options for dietitian services in both Calgary and Edmonton. And so all of these services are free of charge. In Calgary, both Calgary and Edmonton, we have the PCN, so the Primary Care Network. And all you need is a referral from your physician or another healthcare provider. And then here in Calgary, we have the Alberta Healthy Living Program. And then in Edmonton, there are outpatient nutrition services through AHS. So please take advantage of these. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, I'm up next. Am I just going ahead, or are we having any questions?
Thank you so much, Christy. And Kelsey, absolutely. I'm having a look here to see if we have any questions. We don't have any direct questions for Christy, so I think we can go ahead and let you take it, Kelsey. Just a heads up for some of our participants. Be getting a poll coming up in front of the screen, and that's where we try to ask you for input about future seminars and ideas. So don't be disturbed if you see a little bit of a flash come up on your screen. It's just us asking for a little bit of information. So go ahead, Kelsey.
Okay, so I would just like to talk a little bit about some more general healthy eating information, kind of giving you a place to start if you're looking to make some changes to your diet and eating habits. And following that, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about how diet can impact bowel health. So I have up here now Canada's new food guide that was just released last year. So it's been around for just over a year now, and you can see it looks pretty different from the old food guide that we used to have with the rainbow and the different food groups with specific portion sizes. So our new food guide tries to focus more so on an eating pattern to promote healthy eating, and it also specifies that healthy eating is more than just the food you eat, and gives some advice around attitudes and some other things that you can do for healthy eating. So the new food guide has the Eat Well plate and recommends having mostly fruits and vegetables, so filling up half your plate for your meals with those, and then having a smaller portion of protein foods as well as whole grains. You might notice that the old food guide had a specific milk and alternative group, and that those foods have now been combined in with the protein foods. So in that protein food section, you have your meat, poultry, fish, and eggs that are still a really healthy option for protein foods. You've got your dairy, milk, yogurt, cheese, that sort of thing. And our new food guide also recommends choosing more plant-based proteins. So if that's not something that you're used to, maybe trying to incorporate some more beans or lentils, nuts and seeds, soy products like tofu. They're typically lower in fat, and they're high in fiber and protein, so they can make a good addition to your diet. It also suggests making water your drink of choice, so limiting other drinks like juices. Even if they're 100% fruit juice, they still have quite a bit of sugar in them, and limiting drinks that have sugar added to them. So making your meals look like this doesn't have to be complicated at all. It can be as simple as having a scrambled egg with some whole grain toast and fruit. It might look like something like having some chicken with salad and brown rice. It's also important to note it doesn't have to be separated out like this. It's just trying to aim for similar proportions of each of those groups of foods. On the second page of this food guide snapshot, it talks about how healthy eating is more than just the foods you eat. So being mindful of your eating habits. One thing that the new food guide doesn't have is portion sizes and certain number of portions from each group to eat. So it's important to listen to your hunger and fullness cues and try to tune into those to know how much to eat. Everybody's going to be a little bit different in how much they need. Cook more often, so trying to plan and prepare meals more often, maybe incorporating some of those tips that Christy mentioned for meal planning. And enjoying your food and eating meals with others. We know food provides more than just nourishment. It's a really important part of social connection and enjoyment, as well as sharing traditions and culture and celebrations. So just making sure that food is something that can be enjoyable for you is important for healthy eating as well. Some other things that are mentioned here are using food labels. If you do have some specific questions about label reading or that's something you want more information on, feel free to ask about that. It recommends limiting processed foods as those can add extra sodium, sugar, and saturated fat to your diet. You don't need to choose a low-fat diet, but replacing saturated fats, usually the type of fat that comes from animal sources like fatty meats, high-fat dairy, and some processed foods, with replacing those with healthy fats like nuts, seeds, avocados, vegetable oils, or fatty fish is a healthier choice. And lastly, be aware of food marketing. It's everywhere, and it can influence the food and drink choices that we make, and it can make you make choices that are higher in sugar, sodium, or saturated fat. And you'll also often find that the food marketing has conflicting messaging, so it'll be important to use food labels to make your own decision about whether a food is healthy or not. If you check out the food guide website, they do have quite a bit more information and additional resources on healthy eating. So now I'll switch right into talking about fiber and bowel health. So fiber is the part of plant foods that is not digested and absorbed. So both fiber and fluid are important to maintain regular bowel movements and bowel health. We recommend aiming for at least 15 to 30 grams of fiber per day with 6 to 8 cups of fluid. If this isn't something that you've really thought about before, increasing fiber very quickly and suddenly can cause some unwanted symptoms like bloating, gas, and discomfort. So we do suggest try to increase your fiber intake slowly, maybe adding in a couple of servings a day, and try to spread your fiber throughout the day, as well as increasing your fluids to make sure that you're getting enough fluids to help with the digestion of that fiber. By doing this, increasing both your fiber and fluid, it can help prevent constipation and hard stools. It's a fine balance though, and so you need to be mindful of how much fluids you can take to tolerate that fiber, and if you need to restrict fluids for bladder management. Unfortunately, there's very little research about diet and bowel health in the spinal cord injury population. So while it's healthy to make these diet changes, and they can certainly have an impact on your bowel health, it might always be required that you need some kind of medication or digital stimulation, that sort of thing. The dietary changes may not help you manage bowel health alone. So it's a little bit of trial and error with bowels to figure out what works well for you. So there are some different types of fiber, and they work in different ways. So being aware of what the different types are can kind of help you troubleshoot your bowel issues. Soluble fiber is the type of fiber that dissolves in water and forms a gel. If you've ever tried chia seeds and have added them to some kind of fluid and seen them puff up into a gel, that's a good visual of what happens with soluble fiber. So if you're having issues with diarrhea or loose stools, some of these foods can help to thicken stool and help with that problem. So foods like apples, barley, oatmeal is a really good one, your chia and flax seeds, and psyllium fibers are a good source of soluble fiber. Just of note, if you are trying to manage diarrhea, foods that can worsen diarrhea are things like lactose, very high fat foods, and caffeine and alcohol. So it's good to kind of reflect on those, see if there's a lot of that in your diet, and make those changes as well. The other type of fiber that I would like to talk about today is insoluble fiber. So this is the type of fiber that does not dissolve in water, and it helps stool move through your bowel more quickly to keep bowel movements more regular. This helps with constipation and keeping a healthy digestive system. So good sources of insoluble fiber are things like corn or wheat bran, vegetables and fruits, nuts, and whole grain foods. So things like whole grain wheat, barley, rye, whole grain pastas and breads, or brown or wild rice. So how do you choose higher fiber foods, and how do you know how much fiber you're getting in your diet? Some of these high fiber foods might not have a nutrition label that you can look at, but if you're choosing a variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and lentils, nuts, that sort of thing, and trying to include those high fiber choices with your meals and snacks, then there's a good chance that you're having a high fiber diet. You can also look at the nutrition facts panel, the ingredient list, and any labeling on your food products to see how much fiber there is. Some foods will have a fiber claim on the label, so your very high source of fiber will be at least 6 grams of fiber. A high source of fiber would be 4 grams or more, and a source of fiber would be 2 grams or more. You can also check out the nutrition facts panel on the food label. When you're doing this, it's important to first look at the serving size and to see how much of the food the nutrition facts are for. So in this example, it's 1 cup of whatever this food is. And then you can go down to the fiber on the panel here and try to choose foods with at least 2 grams of fiber or more. Or you can look at the daily value where we would consider 15% or more to be a high fiber food. The last thing that I want to mention is looking at the ingredient list for whole grains. In something like bread or crackers, sometimes it can be confusing because they say they contain whole grains, but they might actually have mostly refined grain with just a little bit of whole grain. So you'll want to look at the actual ingredient list and look for that whole in front of the grains that are listed. And they're always listed by weight. So you want to look for those first few ingredients to be the whole grain. It's also important to note that multigrain does not necessarily mean whole grain. It's just a blend of different grains, so they could be the refined lower fiber grain options. I'll end off here with a recipe as well. So this is a black bean summer salad. This has 5 grams of fiber in a 1/2 cup serving, and it's pretty simple to prepare. And it gives you a high fiber choice and also can help you to include some plant-based proteins if that's something that you would like to try in your diet. And that's it for me.
Thanks, Kelsey. I think we may have a question or two in here. I think Alicia highlighted a question or two in here. Alicia, do you want to grab that one up on your screen?
Yeah, so the question is from Beto, and the question is, how many of those plates, so the healthy eating plates, should we consume per day? And how does it work for people with different height and weight, and specifically for people using a wheelchair as their main way of mobility?
Right. So for these plates, typically I would say people are eating their breakfast, lunch, and supper and trying to follow that pattern for their meals. And then snacks can be added as needed and still trying to follow that. Like it might not be each food group at each snack, but trying to have mostly vegetables and fruits for snacks, and then sometimes having a protein food or a whole grain. And how many snacks you need would be based on some of the things that Christy talked about, like weight maintenance, and also just trying to listen to those hunger and fullness cues. So it will be different for everybody, and the food guide doesn't give really specific guidance on how much food or any guidance based on height and weight. It obviously varies based on those things, as well as the typically lower energy needs for people in wheelchairs or with spinal cord injuries. So it's really individual, and if it's something that people wanted more help with, they could try to get in touch with a dietitian that could help them with the more specifics.
Thanks, Kelsey. I think we have another question that also came up that was relevant, and we had one in the chat box as well. Alicia, perhaps we can answer the next question. I saw that you flagged it as well.
Yeah, so this one also came up, and it's asking, are those fiber supplements like Metamucil or Benefiber all soluble fibers?
Yes, so Metamucil is a psyllium fiber supplement, so it typically it is a soluble fiber supplement, but it's typically used for constipation and seems to work well for that. So even though it's a soluble fiber, it's used for constipation as well, and not just diarrhea like I mentioned in this slide.
Thanks, Kelsey. I'll field another question that came in the chat section here privately. It's to all the panelists, and this is a very good question, and it is, if the information that's presented, how does it apply, or what considerations need to be made for those persons that have colostomies and ileostomies?
That would be another thing that's fairly individual, but if it's an older ostomy or ileostomy, then we do recommend going back to just a regular high fiber diet as tolerated. And then if there's any issues with high output or looser stools, then we might suggest like a lower, choosing less insoluble fiber and trying to add more soluble fiber to help thicken stools. So that might be more of an individual concern too, that would be worth talking to a dietitian about.
Thank you, Kelsey. All really good questions here. Please feel free to keep them coming. Thank you, Kelsey. I will now hand it over to Brittany.
All right, just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay? Good? Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to continue the conversation about how important nutrition is for bowel and bladder health and function. And just to give you guys a little bit of context, I've been paralyzed now for just over 21 years. And for many of those years, I dealt with chronic UTIs, probably at least 12 a year, and then an increasingly difficult bowel routine. It was just taking longer and longer to do. And I was trying to do it less frequently because it was taking so long. And then I turned to natural health and nutrition to cure both of those things. And I've managed to be able to reduce my UTIs to a couple every few years and make my bowel routine really manageable to the point that I do it every day, and it takes probably about half an hour at the most. So, and I've used nutrition to do both of those things. So I'm going to explain how I was able to do that. So even though we have spinal cord injuries that have taken away voluntary control over our bowel and bladders, we still have lots and lots of influence over our bladder and bowel health and function. So we don't have total control over it, but we can do a lot to improve the health and function of it with just the foods that we eat, when we eat them, how we eat them, that kind of stuff. So nutrition can play a huge role in that. Next slide, please. And I just want to define what I mean by health and function, because I use them differently. So bladder and bowel health is improving gut microbiome and digestion, the health of the lining of the urinary and intestinal tracts, and reducing UTIs. So that's how I define health. And then how I define function is improving bowel and bladder continence, predictability and consistency of bowel movements, and reducing reliance on pharmaceutical interventions to help with those things. So just wanted to give you a quick definition of how I'm going to use that. Next slide, please. So bladder health and function using nutrition. The most important thing I think that we can do to improve bladder health and function is reduce our frequency of UTIs, which is easier said than done. But if I'm proof, then I think it can be done, because I used to have so many a year and now I barely get them at all. So the first thing that I did, and probably the most important thing that I think we can all do, is drink lots of water. And when you have a spinal cord injury, there's lots of considerations that come along with drinking lots of water, because the more you drink, the more you pee, the more you pee, the more you have to cath, the more you have to worry about accidents, the more you have to time it. So there's a lot more considerations to consider when you have a spinal cord injury and drink lots of water than, you know, if you're able-bodied and have control over your bladder. But it's still something that I think is really, really important. And once I made a commitment to drinking water and lots of it, my UTIs drastically improved. And what do I mean by lots of water? So for me, I used to drink that, you know, recommended maybe 6 to 8 cups of water. And now I drink at least 12. I probably drink at least a cup or 2 cups every 1 or 2 hours. And I've had to increase the amount I cath from every 4 to 6 hours to every 2 to 4 hours, which seems like a lot. But I've exchanged peeing a lot for having to worry about incontinence, which is annoying, and also having to constantly worry about taking urine samples to the lab and stuff. So there are going to be some trade-offs, but I think drinking water is an important one. So that's the first thing that I did. And then eliminating foods that cause bladder irritation, because bladder irritation can cause UTI symptoms in and of itself that might not even really be a UTI. So I used to eat a lot of nightshade vegetables, which are tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplant, because I love them and they're really healthy foods, but they also were causing huge bladder irritation. And once I realized that and I cut them out, then my symptoms of UTI went down, my bladder urgency went down, getting up at night went down. So it's different for everyone, but some of the big ticket bladder irritants are citrus, coffee, and tomatoes. So you can just Google bladder irritants and find a whole list of things that people have found that cause bladder irritation, and you can just try cutting them out for a little while and see if it helps. And just doing those 2 things, drinking lots of water and getting rid of things that might irritate your bladder, will do a lot for improving the lining of the urinary tract. And then another thing that you can do is take preventative nutritional supplements. The 2 that I think are really important are D-mannose and cranberry. D-mannose is just a sugar molecule that mimics the sugar molecules that are in the cells in our urinary tract. And instead of attaching to those sugar molecules in those cells, E. coli, because D-mannose only works with E. coli, they attach to the D-mannose instead, and then they're irreversibly stuck and can't then attach to our urinary tract wall and cause infection. And once they're attached to the D-mannose, they just get flushed out when we go to the bathroom. Cranberry works in a really similar way, except that it makes our bladder wall less sticky to bacteria. So taking those two things on a regular basis help to prevent bladder infections. Next slide, please. And then another thing that I started doing about 5 years ago was researching a lot of herbal remedies for UTI prevention and helping with soothing the bladder wall. And so 3 of the ones that I find most effective are corn silk, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's just the hairs off of corn that are dried and made into a tea. And corn silk helps with bladder irritation, helps to soothe it, and it also helps with bladder urgency. It's used a lot for bedwetting in kids as a natural alternative to pharmaceutical medication. So, and when I've taken corn silk, I've noticed that it increases my my bladder capacity by about 100 milliliters. So I think it works pretty well. Nettle tea is another one, and it has antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. So you can just take that in a tea form and sip it throughout the day. And then the last one that I found to be effective is dandelion tea, and it's just a natural diuretic to help flush fluid through the bladder. And when you're drinking it in tea form, you're also replacing the fluid, so you're not going to get dehydrated. I also find that because it helps to get rid of excess fluid in the body, it sometimes helps with swelling that can happen when you have a spinal cord injury. So I find it's got a double benefit there. And then the last thing, when you've done all of those things to try and prevent UTIs, but if you still get a UTI, I found switching to natural antibiotics to be really helpful, not only just for reducing the side effects of those antibiotics and preventing the bacteria from being killed in my like the vaginal shield that's supposed to help prevent bladder infections, but it also helps with your bowel, and we'll talk about that too. And the natural antibiotic that I use to pretty much cure my chronic UTIs was garlic, and I ate it like it was candy, and it worked really well for me. If I felt a bladder infection coming on, I would eat raw garlic and get symptomatic relief within a day or two. So I found it works really well. The other 2 that I have experience with is uva ursi, which is just an herb, and you can get that in a tea or a tincture, which is like it's like kind of dissolved in alcohol, and then you can take drops of that. And then golden seal, which works really similar to uva ursi, and it just has antibacterial properties that kill the bacteria, and it's well researched with UTI. So that's sort of how I managed to improve my bladder health and function with nutrition. Next slide, please. On to bowel health. So the first thing is improving microbiome and reducing the overuse of those pharmaceutical broad spectrum antibiotics that kill the good gut bacteria is probably the best thing that I did to improve my bowel health. Just because every time we take an antibiotic, it wipes out the good gut bacteria, and then we are kind of starting with a clean slate every time, and it gives those bad bacteria an opportunity to populate when there's no good bacteria to sort of keep them at bay. And so, yeah, just trying to reduce the amount of those antibiotics that you have to take by the other measures that we talked about. And then using fermented food to repopulate the good bacteria is a good step that you can take. So these things are like real fermented pickles, sauerkraut, kimchi, which is fermented cabbage with spices in it, kombucha, which is just sweet tea that's fermented, yogurt, those kinds of things. Next slide, please. And I just want to say something about the real fermented foods, because pickles on the shelf that aren't refrigerated and that have vinegar in them, or sauerkraut that's on the grocery store shelves that's not refrigerated and that has vinegar in it, is not a real fermented food. It does taste like a fermented food because the vinegar sort of breaks down the vegetables like real fermentation does, but it's not actually a fermented product. And so it's not going to have the actual bacteria in it. So if you are looking for real fermented foods, Bubby's is a really good brand. You can probably only find it at like an organic grocery store, Blush Lane, Planet Organic. I order from Organic Box, which is a grocery delivery service, and they have a whole bunch of real fermented food, Bubby's and other brands. But you want to make sure when you look on the ingredient label that it's just the vegetables. So in this case, it's cabbage, water, and salt, and maybe some spices, but no vinegar, because the vinegar is going to kill the bacteria. So I just wanted to mention that because I wasn't aware that the sauerkraut that, you know, comes in the jars on the shelf isn't a real fermented food. Next slide, please. Okay, the next thing in improving bowel health is improving digestion. So spinal cord injury affects everyone differently, and so do foods. Some foods, even healthy ones, are more difficult to digest and can be even harder after spinal cord injury because our motility goes down quite a bit. So just finding out which foods are difficult to digest and making them more digestible by just either cooking them or maybe putting them in a smoothie or something like that to help break down the food a little bit before it gets into our digestive system can help make it more digestible and make it cause less digestive upset. There are some elimination diets out there that can help you determine which foods can cause more gas and digestive upset. The low FODMAP diet is one of them. None of the elimination diets are meant to be used long-term, and they're used mostly as a tool to just figure out symptoms and get symptomatic relief and choose when you want to have less gas and when you don't mind having gas and when you're going to eat those different types of foods. So they shouldn't be used long-term, but they are good tools when they're used in conjunction with a healthy diet. And usually it's a good idea to talk to like a naturopath or something like that about those elimination diets because they can help direct you and guide you during those things. And then consuming digestive bitters. So these are just foods that stimulate gastric juices such as stomach acid, bile, and pancreatic enzymes. And bitters are just like what they sound. They're just foods with like a pungent taste. And a lot of them are really well known, like peppermint and ginger are well known for digestive ease. And so really all they're doing is creating a better digestive response. And so then you have less digestive upset from foods. Dandelion, kale, arugula, 80% dark chocolate. Those things are all digestive bitters. You can get digestive bitters in drops if you want to, and take those like 15 minutes before you eat something to help with digestion. But I find that I just like to drink tea and eat the foods that have those properties. Next slide, please. And then improving the lining of the intestinal tract, I just wanted to talk about a couple really key nutrients that our guts need and where you can get those. So L-glutamine is an amino acid that's essential for cell regeneration. And cell regeneration is really important in our intestinal tract because the single layer of epithelial cells in our intestinal lumen is renewed every 4 to 5 days. So that's a lot of cell regeneration. And our intestinal tract needs approximately 30% of all glutamine consumed. So that's a lot of glutamine just going to the regeneration of our cells in our intestinal tract. So eating good sources of protein that have glutamine in it is a really good thing to do for your gut health. So sources are meat, seafood. You can get vegetarian sources of protein that has glutamine in it as well, like kidney beans. But my favorite way to consume these types of amino acids is in bone broth, because bone broth has a lot of collagen in it. It has a lot of those good things for your gut. Next slide, please. And my favorite way to consume bone broth, my husband always thinks it's disgusting, but chicken feet bone broth is really high in collagen and those good amino acids. And it's really easy to make. So some of the other bone broths have like really big bones, or they just take a really long time to make. And chicken feet are cheap, super, super cheap. You can get them at the grocery store, usually for like, you know, pennies because nobody wants them. And you just stick 2 pounds of them in a big pot with some water, carrot, onion, celery, whatever flavorings you like, a bit of apple cider vinegar to help the proteins leach into the broth, and then you let it sit and simmer for 12 hours. If you have an Instant Pot, it's even easier because you can just put all those ingredients in the Instant Pot, set it to pressure cook, and in 2.5 hours you have really good bone broth. And you know bone broth is really has lots of those good collagen and amino acids in it when it gels. So it's kind of gross, but if it gels like Jell-O, that means it's got a lot of gelatin and collagen in it, and that's the good stuff that you want. So yeah, try some chicken feet bone broth if you're brave. Next slide, please. And then the other nutrient that I wanted to talk about for gut health is butyrate. And butyrate is made by the gut bacteria in your intestinal tract when we eat fiber. So the gut bacteria, they eat the fiber and they make butyrate. And butyrate is the most important source of energy for the cells in our gut wall. And so we want to make sure that we're eating adequate amounts of fiber to feed those gut bacteria so that they can make the butyrate. There are some dietary sources, mostly in butter and full-fat dairy, but the gut bacteria in your intestinal tract are by far the best way to get that butyrate to your cells. Next slide, please. And then for bowel function, even though we don't have control over our bowel function, we can influence it with natural prokinetic agents and natural laxatives. And I like to turn to these 2 things before I turn to pharmaceutical interventions like, you know, Bisacodyl or Dulcolax or something like that. So a prokinetic agent is simply something that enhances the gastrointestinal motility, sorry, by increasing the strength and frequency of the natural contractions and in their natural rhythm. So sometimes when we take the stimulant laxatives, they cause strong contractions, but they're not in the natural rhythm. And it's not just the muscles doing their own thing better, but sort of a more strong, unnatural reaction. And so prokinetic agents are the opposite. They just help our intestinal muscles work better. And they also improve the action of the migrating motor complex, which is just the sweeping waves that move food through our intestines when we're fasting. And some natural choices are ginger and magnesium. And if I want to take ginger, I just make a really strong ginger tea. There's lots of recipes on the internet. I take magnesium daily, and it seems to help with regularity. And then triphala is just a supplement with 3 different herbs that is a really good natural prokinetic agent. And then natural laxatives are just foods that have things in them that have natural laxative tendencies. And prunes is one that is my go-to. It has sorbitol in it, which helps draw water into the large intestine and create a bowel movement. Other ones that I found effective are olive oil and MCT oil, which are just lubricant laxatives. They help move things through the intestinal tract. And then if those things don't work, then I use a product called Swiss Chris, which is just a proprietary blend of herbal tea. And it works super well, really gentle and very predictable. So it's not one of those things that you're going to take it and then you're not going to know when you're going to go. So yeah, if I really want to go and I feel like I need to, I will combine the ginger and 4 prunes, and I call that my poop cocktail. So Google ginger tea, make some strong stuff, and then pop some prunes and try that before you pop some laxatives. I think that was it. Yeah.
Thank you, Brittany. I know we have a question that's sitting in our Q&A, but I want to make sure we have enough time to let Casey get through her presentation. So, Casey, I will turn it over to you, and thank you, Brittany.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm just going to jump in, try and rip off my slides here. I know sometimes nutrition can seem kind of overwhelming, but I'm just going to try and hit it home with 3 solid points. I'll go to please go to the next slide. So yeah, you know, what I really want to impress upon And what I've learned over the past 2 decades of living with a spinal cord injury is really just to keep it simple. I've tried to do a lot of drastic or crazy things with my diet, and maybe just wasn't really good for me and the stress, you know, putting that extra stress on my body. So I'm a working mom, so my motto is just really to keep it simple. I like to buy like really just healthy, simple snacks to keep around the house so that I'm not tempted to go out and devour and eat a full big bag of chips. Yeah, so I like to pair up some fruit with a protein or vegetable with a protein, or just really make sure that I'm always incorporating a little bit of a protein into a snack that I have. Especially, you know, like just leaving the house, if I can easily grab an apple or a banana, that's been super helpful for me. We've talked a lot about bowels here and bladder. I cannot stress that enough. Over the years, I've had many accidents, many UTIs, learned the hard way. And it's weird, you know, I'm paralyzed, I'm a quadriplegic, but I feel like I've learned to listen to my body quite well. And I've learned to know my body, I think, better than I did when I was able-bodied. I always love to keep my water bottle. That's basically like, you will never see me without my water bottle. And, you know, it's even just as simple as me trying to eat an apple a day just so I get that little bit of fiber in my diet. It's an old adage, but it truly works for me. I find it super beneficial. I always find that, you know, if I get back to the basics or I press that restart button, that's what kind of helps get me grounded and back on a good foot. I've, you know, get so busy with life and work that sometimes I just, you know, maybe stray off eating a little bit stray off and eat a little unhealthy. But I seem like, and then I realize, you know, my mood, I get a little bit down, I don't have that energy or motivation. So I find that, you know, if I can just really bring it back to the basics and start with like a healthy breakfast, you know, those are the things that are within my control to actually choose the foods that go into my body. Because sometimes I feel like a lot of things are out of my control with living with my injury. Next slide, please. So a little bit of planning goes a long way. Christy, our dietitian, alluded to this earlier. I'm a huge fan of this. I used to love doing full week meal plans, but that's just not ideal for me anymore. Again, it's just trying to keep things simple. So I'll plan for two meals for that week and make a whole bunch of it so I can have some for leftovers, even lunch the next day. And sometimes, you know, 1 week a month, I will give myself sort of a week off by ordering a meal kit. And I'm assured that I have healthy meals for that week that are easy, and I really didn't have to put any thought into it. Some of them can be expensive, others can be very well priced. So I kind of weigh the odds. You know, if I were to go out and eat a few expensive meals that maybe weren't as healthy, it would probably be better if I ordered from that meal kit company. When I go to the grocery store, I always write a list. I text a list to myself on my phone, and I actually pretty much do the same route around the grocery store, and I'll put my fruits and veggies at the top of my list. So I always go to that section first. I actually have one of those sort of box bags that I could just put on my lap and rip through the grocery store, but I always start there in the fruit and vegetable department, and then sort of make my way around the perimeter of the grocery store, because that's sort of where the more healthy foods are located. I can get really lost in all the processed foods on the other aisles. But yeah, just getting to know your grocery store and kind of hanging around the perimeters, it's what's really worked for me in maintaining a little bit of a healthier grocery list. One thing actually that I've sort of, we started doing since quarantine, because, you know, we're all together. I have a husband and a 6-year-old son now. We like to plan a party night. So every person gets to kind of pick a meal and maybe a little treat, and then we kind of get together and make it together. It relieves me from having to think about one thing for dinner, which is nice. and just hoping to really instill that those life skills to my son, that you know, cooking is very important and can be learned at any age. As my husband, getting him to help cook in the kitchen, and it's fun for all of us. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'm just going to wrap it up with you know, ultimately just have fun with it. I have struggled quite a bit in trying to get back into the kitchen with my hands, but eating truly, for me at least, is one of the simplest joys of living. I joke, but I say you can really travel around the world just by what you cook in your kitchen. And yeah, just tap into my senses of smells with different spices, and I just really enjoy it. So I always encourage people, you know, just try it. You know, I like going to Asia or Mexico or Italy all in one week, just with the meals that I'm cooking with my family. Back when I had my injury, I didn't have a ton of resources that are currently now available for all of us that are injured or are newly injured. YouTube is a great one. You know, I always recommend to people, type in your injury and say cooking, you know, C6-7 quad and cooking. There are tons of videos of quads, paras, all cooking using tons of different tools that are just so helpful. You know, that for me was one of the main things I needed to get back in the kitchen after I was injured, but I literally couldn't even hold a knife or, you know, struggle to make scrambled eggs. So just really simple things. And I failed a lot. I'm not gonna lie, I failed a ton trying different recipes, but I feel like I'm like a scientist in the kitchen. So I like experimenting and hopefully I make it better the next time. But I just find that really therapeutic and fun to be in the kitchen. Probably the biggest thing though, and the dietitians had hit on this too, the 80-20 rule, because this is a positive investment for our life. Try and eat well and healthy for about 80% of the time, but nobody's perfect. Nobody is perfect. I've got to give myself those times to have treats, especially in the summer. I'm a big fan of eating lots of fruit and, you know, getting in a bike ride and going for an ice cream cone. So it's kind of balancing. I really try, it's taken a long time, but I really just try and be kind to myself, whether I'm eating healthy or kind of stray off that path, because it's important to know that nobody can be perfect, and we're just human. We're trying to do the best that we can, and perfection will drive. It drove me crazy trying to be too perfect with my diet. So yeah, I appreciate everybody listening to my take on it. I hope you have some questions, but thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you to all our presenters. That was fantastic. I really appreciate having all this information come in from so many different sources. You'll see that there was a bit of a poll that came up in front of you now. Please feel free to answer that. It's always helpful for us. And thank you, Joanna, at Praxis for getting those polls up. I wanted to first address, we do have one remaining question, and that is, if I don't have, if I find that if I don't take Metamucil, my bowels just stop really working and progressing. Is this likely from a paralyzed bowel? I think that if we can put that question to some of our panelists to jump in on, that would be fantastic. So any one of our panelists want to address that question, please?
I can answer this just from like my own experience. When I was first trying to heal make my bowel routine better, I went crazy with fiber, and I just ate so much of it that my bowel got addicted to the fiber. And I've since read a lot of studies and a lot of things that say that once you start eating fiber, your bowel gets really used to it, and it almost needs a little bit extra stretch all the time in order to maintain the sensitivity of the nerves to the stool inside to move it along. And so I had to actually like rehab my bowel from fiber, and it was really difficult to come off of fiber because I was eating like chia seeds and flax seeds, and I had to keep eating that. And so I had to eat a lot of insoluble fiber to maintain the bulk so that it still had the stretch, but without sort of clogging up my bowel, if that makes any sense. But that's a very personal experience. Maybe some of the other clinicians can have a more medical, you know, recommendation. But I know for me, my bowel did get addicted to the fiber. Like, it just got so used to it. So it was a long process to kind of come off of all of the, you know, supplemental fiber and just really get it from food. But that's my experience. So.
Thank you, Brittany. Any other kind of thoughts on that from any of our other panelists? Then I will first of all say thank you to Christy, Kelsey, Brittany, and Casey. That was fantastic. I learned a ton. I really appreciate that. I also wanted to make sure that I draw a little bit of attention for all of our participants. If you haven't heard about the Rehabilitation Advice Line, we'd like to make sure that you know about it. It's a very new Alberta-only service, and you've seen some of that information up on your screen now. There's a toll-free number, and really what this is for, it's for Albertans that have had an injury, whether that's an orthopedic surgery recovery, a neurological condition, such as spinal cord injury, Parkinson's, any neurological condition, or if you're recovering from COVID. This is a brand new initiative with Alberta Health Services, and really you can phone and speak directly to an allied health clinician who's in your area. So this is something that we'd really like to make sure that everybody knows about, and that you call if you have questions about rehabilitation, whether you're coming home from a surgery or whether you have some aspects of home care, whatever that may be. We'd really like to see the advice line get a little bit more use, because if it doesn't, then perhaps it would go away. And we find that it's a really good service, and a lot of wonderful people in the community have fought for this to actually become real. So please help us spread the word on that. You can see, it's a very difficult long number, unfortunately, but if you could take that number and help spread it around in the community, that would be wonderfully appreciated. And we're going to be mentioning this in all of our webinars from now on, because we really want to make sure that we help drive this message home. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. I'd like to point out that if you have any questions on this, and if you want to see some of the videos that come up, they will be posted on our Facebook, our Instagram, and our YouTube channels. If you have any other questions, please feel free to get a hold of Steve Crochetier. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. And thank you, everyone, and we will see you all soon again.